Hey, it's Eli, aka Atlas. Today I'm going to be doing a long overdue video on drawing human feet, an important and extremely often overlooked element of knowledge of human anatomy. The first thing we need to know about drawing feet is that they're extremely easy to do. Once you know all the hard rules of constructing the anatomy, then you can make the fast rules on doing it. I've come up with a few techniques that spawned from lessons from my brother, who is also an artist, as well as years of practice and study from books, photography, so on and so forth. The human foot is a mechanical structure containing 26 bones, 33 joints, and more than 100 muscles, tendons, and ligaments. The joints of the foot are the ankle and the subtalar joint and the interphalangeal articulations of the foot. The prominent regions, which is what you really need to know, are called the hind foot, the midfoot, the forefoot, and the instep. So how do you know where to begin drawing those? If you take a look at the shape of a foot, whether it be your own foot or a photographic reference, the first thing you have to note is the shape of the foot. The back of the foot, known as the heel, is slimmer than the front of the foot. The inside of each foot is curved toward each other around this section, while their outer edges are relatively smooth and straight. Since there are no hard or correct rules for starting the foot, I'll advise you to think of them as two balls, one big and one small, representing the heel and the ball of the foot, small at the back and large at the front. Let's call it, for reference, a figure 8. Shape is a bit like that. And if you were to turn it into an 8, like that. Now we'll flesh it out a bit. We'll start with the curve. Now remember, if you're doing this, you can use the two balls. This is going to replicate the ball of the foot, and this is the heel. On top of that, we'll put the toes. They move in an arching kind of way, almost like a triangle. Once you've got that established, feet give you a certain ability to cheat because unlike the phalanges on hands, human toes are relatively short, so you don't have to struggle too hard to illustrate their flexibility, as toes, while somewhat opposable, aren't very flexible. So you can establish your toes as small, oblong, oval shapes. Think of each toe. Big toe is widest, second toe is slim but longest, following is the shorter toes. The toes keep getting smaller and smaller. Once you've got all the sizes right and the way you like for the foot you're trying to draw, you can draw a simple line through the middle of your toes. As you can see, I've already done that, and now they are in two sections. If you want to take it a little further, you can illustrate the bones of the foot with simple lines once you get familiar with all the joints and attachments. You can begin to simulate all of the cuboid bones, the instep bones, the phalanges, so on and so forth. You can put a few wrinkles if you need to. And that will give you your basic foot, and you can basically take that idea, improve on it, and take it from there. Now, when dealing with the foot in perspective, you have to deal with all the rules of perspective. What's close to the foreground is bigger, but everything still has to be proportional and relative to each other, and everything in the back is smaller. This is where rules of thumb come in handy. Think of the foot as simply having a front and a back. We're still using the two balls as the concept of the foot. Again, you can use the balls to illustrate this, and this is where it's important to make sure you can do the construction before you start to flesh it out. So we're going to add the toes again. Big toe is widest. toes always kind of have an ever-present curve to them. They kind of curl up a bit. Even when they're a little straight, they don't go just straight out. They always lean a bit. Since they're always on the floor, they're kind of always gripping the floor. Whereas the hands can be a little more relaxed and just stay straight. Observe the foot carefully. You'll start to see all the ways that the foot arches. As we said before, inside of the foot has a curve to it. Outside is a lot straighter. It's still curves, but it's not as dramatic as the interior of the foot. Put some drop shadows to give it a little more depth. And to drop it into perspective a little more dramatically. On that line across the toes. Simulate the phalanges and all the limbs and extensions. Another thing not to forget, or should I say another thing to remember, is to try and give your feet toes when you do them, because that will actually help give a sense of form to the toes. Only if they're visible from the angle that you're drawing them, of course. Like I said, the toes always kind of have a curve, so the lowermost toes, you'll be able to see the toenails quite often. Again, do a couple drop shadows, put it in perspective, give it a little more form and a little more depth. As you can see, we continue to build the foot. And there we go. Simple foot in perspective. So to emphasize, always make sure to add your toenails. You can use shadows and lighting to give a better sense of form. And always start with the basics. Start with your two balls and then you can build the foot from there. Now from the side you have to think more about the length of the foot as opposed to the foreshortening. But the rules of construction are relatively the same, only going diagonally or horizontally as opposed to vertically. Another thing is when you're building the foot from this angle, you can still use the idea of two balls, but when it's in perspective the way it is here, I start with almost a more triangular shape to simulate the bones of the foot. So we can start with two balls, and then on top of the ball of the foot and in front of the heel, we'll make it a bit more triangular, and this is going to kind of simulate the height of the foot, because you don't want your feet to just be flat. You always want to use shapes that can give your foot a little more form and a little more weight and a little more dimension. So again, using the same rules to construct the foot. Oblong shapes for the toes, two balls, put the triangle on top to simulate a little bit of height. Ankle. This is my preference for inking when I do the feet, but you could probably apply this as well. I like to do hard outlines on everything. Then when I go in with the details, I put thinner lines, so the toes and the toenails are going to have much thinner lines than the outline of the overall foot. Don't be shy to put the folds of skin between the foot if the need arises. And add the knuckles of the feet. Typically I draw the knuckles on the phalanges of the hands and the foot both, just to give it a little bit of a jointy look, basically, which is the same reason I said earlier that you should probably add a line across the middle of the oblong shapes at the bottom of the foot. So it's basically the same idea. A little feathering just works to kind of direct the eye and give the foot a certain kind of shape without drawing a hard line across it. The key is to kind of imply the bones of the foot without having to draw them all. You could draw the veins, because feet can be quite vascular, but I think we'll skip that for now. So in review, always make sure you start with the basics. And that means using two balls to simulate the shape of the feet, the major joints of the feet, the front, the back, the instep, all of that. Call it a figure 8, you can call it whatever you want, but just remember the inside of the foot, which is the section where your 2 feet face each other, are curved while the outside is straighter, and the toes are simple oval or oblong shapes. Then you can draw a simple line through it to just simulate all the joints, all the knuckles, things like that. Eventually, once you get better at drawing feet, you can begin to add all these different lines to kind of indicate where all the bones and all the joints begin, where they end, so on and so forth. And now we move on to the next step. In knowing how to draw feet, you gotta put some shoes on them. So we'll tackle that in the next video.
Salam, smit mi sumia. Anda to Shazrath. Setelah sepanjang